In this video, we're going to talk about spirituality for men. My name is Christopher, and I'm a therapist who works specifically with men. And I'm going to kick us off here with just a little quotation by Jack Kornfield, who is an author and a meditation teacher. And in this quote, he says, "Spirituality is not about escaping the world. It's about learning to live deeply in it." And I think that helps to kind of kick off this video, because the way in which I define spirituality is one's own subjective experience to reality, to nature, to the universe, whatever language feels comfortable for you to use here. I'm not talking about religion or dogma. I'm talking about one's own personal connection to the universe. And I think it would really help just to kind of maybe tell a little bit of my story, sort of how I've gotten to where I've gotten to today. And when I was raised as a child, I grew up in a fairly Christian setting. I went to a private Christian school. I grew up in Montana, which is a very rural and conservative state. And at this school, it was pretty fundamentalist, evangelical Christian. And some of the lessons I was taught was that the earth is 10,000 years old, and that I would go to hell for my sins. And so I was raised with a lot of this like very strict sort of Christian ideology. And I remember one of the first times when I kind of had a moment of sort of challenging these ideas was when I started learning about fossils, like dinosaur fossils. And I had asked my teacher, if the earth is only 10,000 years old, why are there dinosaur fossils in the ground? And her explanation was God put the dinosaur fossils in the ground to trick the non-believers. And that was really strange. And fortunately, I grew up with a household with parents who did not, hold to those beliefs that the earth was 10,000 years old. They actually explained that we can use carbon dating and we can see how old fossils are using science. And so it was my first sort of like conflicting way of viewing authority and spirituality. I'd been so used to having spirituality shoved down my throat that I thought that other people knew what was going on. And so I just consistently believed it. And that was my first kind of like challenging moment. And from there on, I still attended private schools in a Christian setting for a few more years. And I entered into public school at about seventh grade. And that was kind of when I just completely rejected the idea of religion. I just said, okay, everything about this is BS. None of this makes sense. It's very contradicting in and of itself. There are a lot of things that don't add up here. And so I just kind of like put it on the back burner. And, I became like a rationalist or a materialist that all I can feel, touch, taste, smell is all that exists. And you can't prove me differently. And that's when I kind of just rejected this idea. You could even say like I split away from my sense of spirituality or my soul at that point. And it was done out of a protective sort of way of keeping me safe. However, it was done with a lot of hubris, with a lot of ego, kind of this righteousness that I know what's going on and other people don't. And obviously that's just not the case. And that's just a very young way of thinking. And I ended up going through school kind of with that same sort of attitude. And then I actually found myself in the realm of working with psychedelics, specifically LSD. I had a very profound LSD experience when I was about 18 years old. And I had finally, for the first time, recognized that there's more going on outside of what I can taste, touch, sense, smell, and feel. And some good examples of this are just like how little of the light spectrum, the human eye is actually capable of detecting. It's like less than a percentage of all the different forms of light. We have ultraviolet, we've got, infrared, various forms of different waves that the sun produces that our eyes are just incapable of detecting. Different forms of radiation. There's also different frequencies of sound that we're able to hear and not hear, like a dog whistle, for example. We can blow super hard into a dog whistle. Humans don't really hear that, but a dog, can hear that very well, right? So finally, I'm starting to recognize that there are different frequencies of energy or sensory sort of experiences that I'm not able to access. And even just like the idea of understanding that, science, we have this idea of like dark matter, that 96% of our universe give or take, is created with dark matter, which is sort of the substance that we have no idea. And from that perspective, I was finally able to develop a sense of separation from just kind of like a collective sort of cultural brainwashing that people know what's going on. And it finally made me realize for the first time that nobody really knows what's going on. I have no clue what's going on. I have just as good as a guess as anybody else does. And it really helped me to get in touch with the mystery that this universe is a mystery from moment to moment. And so when I speak about spirituality, I speak about one's connection to the mystery. And I know for myself that if I didn't have some sort of connection to my own sense of spirituality, to nature or a higher power, that I can really fall into a state of depression, existentialism. And it happens from time to time when I get lost or stuck in my, mind games or my ego, that I lose sense of that aspect, that there's more going on than I can understand. And when I lose sense of that, I really do go into states of despair. And so a large part of my process of even just connecting to spirituality has been learning to trust the unseen, learning to trust, you could call it dark matter, or the unseen forces, or things going on around me that I don't have access to. And so for me, some practical ways that I've also connected with my sense of spirituality is actually just through sort of self-development. Specifically, one practice that has really benefited me is Vipassana meditation. Vipassana meditation is taught typically in 10-day retreats. They're silent meditation retreats. They're actually completely free to go to. And I can for sure say that I would not be who I am today without learning this very simple meditation technique. And for me, once again, spirituality is a very practical tool. It's not some woo-woo out there sort of mystical experience, although it can be very mystical. It's more so for me, a way for me to just cope with reality. In Vipassana meditation in particular, it teaches one what to do with their suffering. It helps one to understand where suffering comes from, which is a fundamental truth of the human experience, and how to work with it. And it gives meaning to the suffering as well. And so for me, Vipassana has been an incredible practice, a science, a tool to help me to begin to reconnect to myself, to bring a sense of equanimity or a sense of balance, mind and peace to my life. And I think ultimately what spirituality is giving me is a sense of joy, an ability to laugh more, even when things aren't going well, even when the world feels like it's crumbling in. Can I still find some humor and some playfulness, and not to spiritual bypass, but to recognize that maybe my mind can let go of the seriousness of things at times. Way easier said than done. However, for me personally, I think a very good testament to somebody who's very well developed on the spiritual path is their ability to laugh and to not take things so seriously all the time. Of course, there's moments to be serious and to respect. However, to be light and playful and bubbly, I think that can be very helpful as a human to cope with reality. So, if you're a man who's grown up with a sense of dogma, I think it can be very important to start recognizing where did you begin to develop belief systems that maybe weren't yours. We come into this world without knowing anything, in complete union with the universe. And slowly over time, people start feeding us ideas. And for me, I think spirituality is learning to recognize one's own perception of reality as opposed to something that has been imposed upon them. So if you grew up in a very religious or dogmatic setting, there might be some unconscious beliefs there that are operating. It could be like Catholic guilt, or a fear of going to hell, or this idea that perhaps you need to be a particular way in order to have a good afterlife, or whatever it might be. Nobody really knows what's going on. I'm not saying I have any answers here, but essentially what I'm trying to recognize is that it's important to understand where you've been influenced by other people. And so if you're looking just for like some very practical tools to start connecting with the sense of spirituality, I think that meditation and prayer are some incredible ways to start connecting. I've heard that meditation is listening to the universe, and prayer is talking to the universe. And it could be talking to anything. It could be talking to the great pizza spaghetti monster in the sky. It could be talking to a tree. It could be talking to a higher power or a loved one who's, passed and has crossed into the other side. Connecting to one sense of spirituality can be a very great way to cope with existential feelings that we all have inside of us, for instance, especially with death anxiety. It's something that is part of the human experience, that we sort of conceal this idea that one day, me too, that I'm going to pass away. And living close to that truth can maybe help us even connect with that sense of spirituality a little bit more. But to understand that maybe if this isn't all that's going on, what I can taste, touch, feel, smell, maybe there's something else going on, then perhaps there's more to this idea of death. And it's a mystery. Birth is a mystery and death is a mystery. Carl Jung, he says, life is a short pause between two great mysteries. And I think that's so profoundly beautiful, to recognize that we don't know what's going on, to stay humble, to stay low to the ground, psychologically, meaning staying connected to that sense of spirituality, to our humanness. And ultimately, I think that connecting to our humanness, to who we are, to the healing process is a way to connect with one's own sense of spirituality. So meditation and prayer are fantastic ways to start just connecting, very easy ways, something you can do without any money, without needing anything, talking and listening to the universe. Once again, my name is Christopher. I'm a therapist who works specifically with men. If you're interested in working one-on-one, you can schedule a call clicking the link below, and I look forward to catching you in the next one. Take care.